What is socialism really? Equality and liberty? Taking the power and money out of rich people's hands and giving it back to the people? A revolution to make everything and everyone equal? But have we considered who would be in charge if such revolutions were made? Socialism never stays socialism. There is an agenda. But who are the key figures in this agenda? Episode 3. Communism and Socialism.
Edge of Wonder.
Welcome to the Edge of Wonder.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah,
What's socialism?
that's a good question. Everyone seems to be confused right now about what that means. Some people think it means equality or liberty of some sort, which is a conundrum we'll get into later.
To some people, they think it means taking the power and money out of the rich people's hands and giving it back to the people. But does that really ever happen?
Some people think it means being progressive and fostering some kind of positive change, so it's become a hot term among specific groups of people.
Still, some say it's revolution, specifically that of destroying civilization to make everything and everyone equal.
But have people given thought to who would be in charge if such revolutions were made?
In this episode, we're going to explore one of the most elusive terms in our political atmosphere and let history do the talking.
We'll help everyone define socialism and show you facts that can help you make up your minds about whether it's good or bad.
Let's start at the beginning. Socialism had to come from somewhere, right? One of the arguments often given in favor of socialism is that, quote, we need to give it a chance.
Or when people well learned in the history of socialism and communism say that it never worked, the argument is given that it's never been implemented correctly or we need to try again. After our research, we realized this couldn't be further from the truth.
The entirety of the 1800s was filled with numerous experiments to establish socialist communes even before the word socialism was a term.
Each of these experiments failed miserably. And when we say miserable, we mean it. Now bear with us, this story deserves to be told.
It's important to bring up someone considered to be the first pioneer of the movement later known as socialism, an English cotton mill owner named Robert Owen.
Owen established an industrial system along new lines in a village called New Lanark in Scotland. Owen played the part of a benevolent ruler. He created a system where people were given wages and punished for poor work. Any proceeds from the work at the mill were collected by Owen, and he spent it how he saw fit.
Owen actually used this money for charity donations and philanthropy. Now here's where it gets important. The system we just described is 100% capitalist. So then how is it that Owen is conflated with communism and socialism? Well, we haven't finished the story yet.
After his somewhat successful and unconventional experiment at New Lanark, it seems his reputation made him well known. To make a very long story short, Owen was compromised by Illuminism, which became plainly obvious through his writings at the time.
Owen would consistently express himself in ways only Adam Weishaupt would, exposing his true intentions. And by the way, if you haven't seen our first 2 episodes on communism, we explain everything about Weishaupt in those, so we would recommend watching those.
For example, in the latter, it was stated that the aim of the Illuminati was to make of the human race, without any distinction of nation, condition, or profession, one good and happy family.
And Owen announced,
that new state of existence upon earth, which when understood and applied rationally to practice, will cordially unite all as one good and enlightened family.
Because time is tight, trust us when we say there are multiple examples of how Owen's writings lined up exactly with Weishaupt. But his words aren't the only examples that will help us understand the failures of communism. Because shortly after Owen's mind started to change toward these Luminized philosophies, he attempted to experiment with communities based entirely off of socialist strategies.
In 1824, Owen arrived in America, the New World, and bought a village in Indiana he called New Harmony. He instituted a completely socialist system, but encountered a great difficulty. He found that people had no, quote, noble desire to work for the common good when there was no way to personally profit, meaning they were literally not getting anything for their hard work, but were expected to slave away.
He also found it extremely difficult when people had no personal property of their own. And even when there would be a short time of everyone getting on the same page, human desires for gaining more would always find their way in.
In the end, Owen stated, quote,
No societies with common property and equality could prosper if composed of persons unfit for their peculiar duties. In order to succeed, it was needful to exclude the intemperate, the idle, the careless, the quarrelsome, the avaricious, the selfish.
What this quote is basically saying is that in order to have communism work, a society would have to be comprised of only perfect people.
Socialist-leaning historians to this day still proclaim victory in Owen as the greatest historical figure in creating a socialist experiment that worked. But these historians conveniently overlook the facts. Any economist will tell you the Mill experiment in New Lanark is anything but socialism.
Many other experiments like this happened through the early 1800s, and every single one failed. You can look into this for yourself. Marx and Engels went from criticizing Owen to then championing him as the greatest example of advancement of communism from the early 1800s, which actually makes no sense.
The example of Robert Owen can't be overemphasized. Why? Because there is still to this day a huge misunderstanding of socialism. Many misinformed people constantly use an argument that socialism works. And they know it works because it works in Nordic countries, right?
I mean, if you do research on this as we did, you'll find numerous sources that show that what the Nordic countries implement is absolutely not socialism. In July 2018, an article on Forbes titled "Sorry Bernie Bros, but Nordic countries are not socialist" published. The author called what Nordic countries implement, quote, compassionate capitalism.
In an article on FEE.org, we're going to cite a quote here. In response to Americans frequently referring to his country as socialist, the Prime Minister of Denmark recently remarked in a lecture at Harvard Kennedy's School of Government, quote,
I know that some people in the US associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy.
Why did the president of Denmark say this? It's because those countries thrive off of large financial gains from their market economies. The reason the author called it compassionate capitalism is because these countries often have high taxes that offer some benefits from the government.
But the only reason they're able to have high taxes is because the wages are very high. We've largely covered socialism in terms of economics, right? But now we're going to get more into the heart of the actual matter.
We mentioned Marx and Engels earlier. We should probably look at how those who penned the most influential book on communism, the Communist Manifesto, looked at socialism. If you read the Epoch Times Spectre of Communism series, it says,
In 1875, in critique of the Gotha program, Marx put forward the idea that there is an initial phase of communism, followed by an advanced phase. Compelled by changes in the international situation at the time, Friedrich Engels, in his later years, also proposed democratic socialism, in which votes were used to obtain political power. Democratic socialism was adopted by social democratic party leaders and theorists of the Second International and led to the left-wing parties in many capitalist countries around the world today. Lenin set down clear definitions of socialism and communism. He considered socialism to be the preliminary phase of communism, and communism to be developed on the basis of socialism.
In fact, there is a famous quote from Lenin who said,
The goal of socialism is communism.
This means that since the very beginning of communism, socialism has always been considered to be its preliminary phase. If that's the case, then it would change our perception of how to look at socialism fundamentally, right? Because it never just stays socialism. There is an actual agenda.
Furthermore, there are many organizations that identify themselves to be democratic socialists, a critical part in the above strategy to make a non-communist state communist.
Democratic socialist societies have existed for a very long time in the US. They've also been present in other countries as well. One of the largest democratic socialist societies is the London headquartered Fabian Society. So who are the Fabian socialists?
Well, their philosophy was to not get as crazy as the revolutionaries. Their goal was to use alternative tactics to create fundamental change and social justice. Notice the terms here? They believed they could do this through the bourgeoisie or cultural elites completely overseeing and strategically influencing the working class.
In Epoch Times' Spectre of Communism, it states,
Unlike totalitarian regimes, socialism in democratic states slowly eats away at people's freedoms through legislation. Like the metaphor of the boiling frog, the process of establishing a socialist system takes decades or generations, leaving people gradually numb, oblivious, and accustomed to socialism, all of which enhance the deceit. The essence and objective of this type of gradual socialism are no different in substance from the violent form.
how did they do this? Well, they'd tweak the culture. An example of this is playwright Bernard Shaw, one of the most prominent members of the Fabian Society. Who was Bernard Shaw? Well, he was a nutbar, that's for sure.
And why do we say that? Not only was he an advocate of socialism and eventually total dictatorship, but he also wrote plays to influence popular opinion. Let's look at a quote from Bernard Shaw.
I also made it quite clear that socialism means equality of income or nothing, and that under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed, whether you like it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character enough to be worth all this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner.
What?
Does that sound like liberty? We just started to talk about cultural manipulation, or the strategy by which the revolution is changed from violent takeover to one of a slower change. The purpose is to degrade moral values and totally distort culture.
150 years in the making. The ultimate evil specter. Lies, hatred, and struggle. Traditions destroyed. The deep state's cult, communism.
One of the biggest advocates for socialism and its quiet cultural revolution was Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci, a founding member of the Communist Party of Italy and a Marxist theorist.
The documentary Agenda, that you should all watch, said Gramsci bore, quote, more responsibility for our social ills than anyone on the planet. Why?
Gramsci recognized that in order for the ruling class in society to maintain power, that the people being governed must themselves accept completely the moral and political values of the governing class. In this way, over time, the state naturally turns from socialism to communism through a non-coercive method. In this Marxist philosophy, the idea is called cultural hegemony.
This cultural hegemony, or the idea that the ruling class sets the social, moral, and economic understandings over time, he called gradualism, and he embraced this concept. Instead of forcing a revolution, it could come in time and in another form. Evolution instead of revolution.
Gramsci's role in socialism cannot be overlooked by any means. While imprisoned by Mussolini, Gramsci's pen was the sword that communism needed to push its agenda in the United States.
Gramsci knew that a revolution of workers' uprising would and could never happen in America.
So he looked to intellectuals and influential people as the ambassadors that could bring the revolution communism needed.
And with this, he put forward his idea that this gradual cultural change would need something additional, a subversive tactic that hadn't been done before: community organizing. Well, not to mention completely infiltrating the media, but we digress.
Right, and this is where it gets juicy. As Gramsci was dying in prison, his Marxist proposals took hold in the Frankfurt School by way of a man named George Lucas. And we're not talking about George Lucas from Star Wars.
No, we're not. Lucas, a famous Marxist theorist, had parallel conclusions to Gramsci, and he founded the Frankfurt School as a Marxism think tank incubator. And guess what? When Hitler came into power, it was the distraction they needed.
In 1935, the Frankfurt think tank moved to New York and created a partnership with Columbia University. How convenient. And do you think it ends with that? Nope.
This Frankfurt School had many members. During World War II, a few of these renowned Frankfurt School associates got themselves involved in very curious roles. Herbert Marcuse was a part of the Office of Strategic Services. This was basically the CIA of that time before the CIA was officially created.
Theodore Adorno is another one. He moved to Hollywood and wrote a book called The Authoritarian Personality, where he basically said anyone with traditional values or defending them is a fascist. So is this why everyone gets called a Nazi today when people don't like what you say?
Max Horkheimer, also a part of this Frankfurt School, moved to Hollywood with Adorno. This guy was responsible for coining a term called critical theory. Critical theory is the act of criticizing any traditional social institution and not giving an alternative suggestion. You can only give it criticism. He basically weaponized criticism. This theory was the genesis of something called political correctness.
This is not us speculating. This is fact that can be found if you dare to go down the rabbit hole of researching socialism and communism strategies. But it makes sense, right? If your goal is to change popular belief, there would have to be tactics that would work this out.
We could do a whole show on this, but we'll leave that for a later time. All of what we just explained was Gramsci's cultural hegemony and gradualism in practical action.
Now, before, we talked about Gramsci's strategy of community organization. There can be no greater example of this than community organizer Saul Alinsky.
In the documentary Agenda, they call Saul Alinsky Gramsci's greatest disciple.
For those who don't know who Saul Alinsky is, he is considered to be the father of what is called community organizing. Many of the recent protest movements, such as Occupy Wall Street, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Women's March, and so many others, were all inspired by his book, Rules for Radicals.
Now, the right to protest is written into our Bill of Rights, with the First Amendment, which states, the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. However, let's get into some background of how he got started and his idea of organizing.
Alinsky wrote the book Rules for Radicals in 1972, and in it, it systematically set forth his theory and methods of community organizing, which has become the doctrine for the entire radical left. In it, he states,
Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. One acts decisively only in the conviction that all the angels are on one side and all the devils are on the other.
In how the specter of communism is ruling our world, it reveals Alinsky's true nature when George H.W. Bush, the then U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, was giving a speech while the Vietnam War was still in progress.
Anti-war students went to Alinsky for help in how to protest without getting expelled because Bush was defending the war. So he came up with an idea for them, which to this day is a tactic that is still being used, just in a lot more subversive and damning way.
He had them dress up in Ku Klux Klan costumes, and whenever Bush would say something positive about the war, they would stand up with posters that read, "The KKK supports Bush." The students did so with very successful attention-getting results.
Now, we aren't saying we are in support of Bush. We're just making a point of these low tactics being used.
Which we know are still being used today, and even more extreme, but all of that would be for another episode.
Right. Before Alinsky's death, he gave a very lengthy interview with Playboy magazine, which was so open and candid that the FBI started investigating him just because of it.
He talks very openly about working with the Communist Party of the US, how he was ripping off his cafeteria when he was a student, convinced the church to support him in his community organizing, and a slew of other things, including the big one.
How he met Al Capone's top executioner, Big Ed Stash.
What a name.
And then went on to become friends with Frank Nitti, Capone's number 2 man who took Alinsky under his wing.
When asked why they would let an outsider in, Alinsky's response was,
Why not? What harm could I do them? Even if I told what I'd learned, nobody would listen. They had Chicago tied up tight as a drum. They owned the city, from the cop on the beat right up to the mayor. The only real opposition to the mob came from other gangsters, like Bugs Moran or Roger Toey.
So basically what this paragraph is saying is that he wasn't really a threat to the mob, so they kind of let him in.
Dinesh D'Souza, a best-selling writer and filmmaker who released The Death of a Nation last year, said in an article he wrote in 2015,
Even the term community organizing, which Alinsky invented, is derived from the term organized crime. It turns out that Alinsky patterned his entire life's work on what he learned from crime. The mob taught Alinsky, and Alinsky founded a school that taught his methods to scores of disciples, most prominently including a current president, Barack Obama, and an aspiring one, Hillary Clinton.
Boom! Hillary Clinton was his student who wrote her college thesis on him and then wrote him a personal letter which has now been published online. Again, this dude was friends with Al Capone's number 2 man.
Alinsky's ultimate goal was to subvert and destroy, not to benefit any group. Thus, in implementing his plan, it was necessary to conceal the real purpose with localized or staged goals that were seemingly reasonable or harmless by themselves, and to mobilize large crowds to action.
So when people were accustomed to being mobilized, it was relatively easy to mobilize them and act toward more radical goals.
Another plan concocted by Alinsky was organizing 2,500 activists to occupy the restrooms in the Chicago's O'Hare International Airport in 1965. Because of this, it forced its operations to a grinding halt.
Prior to actually carrying off the plan, he leaked the plan, thus forcing the authorities to negotiate.
At the very end of the Playboy interview, Alinsky said that when he died, he would unreservedly choose to go to hell. Hell would be heaven for me. And then he explained how he would begin to organize the proletariat there because, quote, they're my kind of people.
Finally, in Rules for Radicals, Alinsky dedicates his book to the first radical ever. He states, quote, lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all our legends, mythology, and history, the very first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. Oh my goodness.
Now there's so much about Alinsky that we didn't state here. So we'll probably make a whole video on his insane, crazy protest stories, how he grew up, who has he inspired, how deep it goes, how years later tens of millions of people were deceived by one man who was his greatest student and started out as a community organizer in Chicago.
Wonder who that could be. Obama. But we won't be able to publish all the details like this on our YouTube channel for sure. We would get blacklisted in an instant, so that would be one we're saving for our own platform at edgeofwonder.tv.
To wrap this up, there are many new political leaders coming onto the scene. We've noticed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and men like Bernie Sanders.
These people promote things like democratic socialism. They tell you things like Scandinavian countries already have this figured out. As we stated earlier, not only is democratic socialism a loaded word, and it comes with an enormous amount of history, but also we showed that Scandinavian countries are very far from being socialist.
These are educated people though, right? Or are they? Are any of us? How could they neglect all of history unless they were unaware, misinformed, or pushing an agenda? I mean, she does think there are 3 branches of government, the presidency, Senate, and the House, and she wants to be president in the future. So.
But we digress.
There you go.
Whenever anyone comes into the scene, especially those who come about due to a viral video or the like, you have to ask some questions. Who are these people? Where did they come from? What organizations are funding them? Who's in charge of those organizations? Who are the people that they're tied to? Who were their mentors? And then ask why.
Honestly, as we keep researching, it's astounding how much of these tactics and strategies have been laid out in plain sight. Their goals have always been to infiltrate our education, our belief systems, and our universities. Since the start, they're promoting evolution of cultural change instead of revolution.
You can find all this information yourselves with ease. We did.
To follow up, we're going to do a whole episode to show examples of how these ties and organizations work. This episode will air on our premium platform. We'd love to push it here, really, but this information is too sensitive, and like Rob said, we would definitely be censored.
The episode will revolve around Saul Alinsky, the people he's tied to, and the people he's mentored. The findings were
Absolutely insane.
as everyone can see, socialism is one of the most deceitful things that has leaked into our society by way of communism. In every instance, socialism's goal has been to cause revolution, whether covertly or overtly, and its ultimate goal is always to lead to a full-on communist state.
And it's not just us saying that. This is history speaking for itself, a history you're more welcome to look into, just like we did.
At the very beginning of this episode, we spoke about two words that were critical in this philosophical argument: liberty and equality. These words that have always been at the forefront of the socialist and communist movements.
We want to leave you with a quote from Nesta Webster's World Revolution, the plot against civilization pertaining to these two words.
For observe the contradiction. It is impossible to have complete liberty and equality. The two are mutually exclusive. It is possible to have a system of complete liberty in which every man is free to behave as he pleases, to do what he will with his own, to rob or to murder, to live, that is to say, under the law of the jungle, ruled by the strongest. But there is no equality there. Or one may have a system of absolute equality, of cutting everyone down to the same dead level, of crushing all incentive in man to rise above his fellows, but there is no liberty there.
Freedoms are a very personal thing, and people do have rights to things like speech, their religious beliefs, having a home, having a family, etc. We support those rights because through them we can help other people of our own accord, through the most important thing humans have to offer: kindness.
All right, and with that, everyone, we'll see you out
On the edge.
Hey guys, Rob and Ben here. The huge announcement that you've all been waiting for is... I'm sure that's really what they're waiting for, Rob.
Actually, no. We've launched edgeofwonder.tv. Tell us more about it, Ben.
Well, Rob ate some beans. Okay. For those who haven't seen our live streams, Edge of Wonder TV is the platform where we'll host all of our videos, including the exclusives that we can't post on YouTube.
Like the 2-hour presentation we did on the deep state communism affair.
Right. We'll post episodes early so subscribers get early access.
We'll also do weekly live streams covering sensitive topics that we definitely can't cover on YouTube.
Like what Rob ate.
Yeah.
Subscriptions are $9.99 a month, and you get 10% off if you subscribe annually.
We want to grow this platform with all y'alls. We're only opening it up to 1,111 subscribers this time around. That's so complicated.
We thought you would all like that. Once we hit that subscriber mark, we'll premiere new uncensored long-form content featuring some of your favorite guests every month. It's featured on YouTube.
Well done, sir. Early subscriptions are limited, so secure your spot at edgeofwonder.tv.
We definitely love you. Thank you for all of your
Yes.
support. And
Thank
really,
you for saying that. You guys are the best. You guys are the reason we do this.
and you've helped us make what all of this is, and we've all done it together, so we thank you.
And we'll see you out.
On the edge. The huge announcement that you've all been waiting for is...
I should do that in the actual video.
I'm sure
And then
actually-
be like, just kidding,
Yeah.
we've launched edgeofwonder.tv.
Yeah, and then it's like,
It's actually, it'd be fun if we...
don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
All right, so go ahead and record.
Okay.